Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX with me, Devika Devan. Our top focus right now is Russia that has confirmed it has successfully tested the Burevestnik, a nuclear-powered and nuclear-capable cruise missile that President Vladimir Putin says can overcome any defense system in existence today or in the foreseeable future. Hello and welcome to this episode of NewsX Deepdive. Before we delve any further, take a look at the launch itself. Well, following the successful launch, Russia's top chief of the general staff, reported to President Putin that the missile covered a distance of 14,000 kilometers and remained airborne for approximately 15 hours during the test. Listen in.
There was a multi-hour flight of that missile that traveled 14,000 kilometers, and that's not its limit. Right, it was powered by a nuclear propulsion engine, and the technical characteristics of the Burevestnik missile allow it to be used against protected sites anywhere. During the test flight of the missile, all the vertical and horizontal maneuvers were done that had been planned to demonstrate that this missile can overcome any defenses. 14,000 kilometers, right? Yes. And how long was it in flight? About 15 hours.
So what do we know about Russia's Burevestnik missile, and why is it that it has the potential to surpass air defense systems? Well, firstly, the missile, officially called the 9M730 Burevestnik, which translates to Storm Petrel, has been under development for years and was first publicly announced by Putin in March 2018. NATO refers it to as the SSC X9 Skyfall. The weapon is both nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed, giving it capabilities distinct from conventional cruise missiles. Well, unlike standard systems that rely on conventional fuel and are thus limited in range, the Burevestnik is equipped with a miniature nuclear reactor. This allows it to remain airborne for extended durations, theoretically days, and travel intercontinental distances with refueling. The Nuclear Threat Initiatives, which is a US-based nonprofit specializing in security analysis, explained in a 2019 assessment that the missile could carry a nuclear warhead, circle the globe in low altitude, avoid missile defenses, dodge terrain, and drop the warhead at a difficult-to-predict location. Russia has asserted that the Burevestnik can fly at extremely low altitudes, roughly 50 to 100 meters above the ground, far lower than conventional cruise missiles, which typically operate at higher altitudes. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, which cited Russian military sources in 2021, the missile could have a theoretical range of up to 20,000 kilometers, enabling it to strike targets anywhere on the planet from within Russian territory. A 2021 report by the US Air Force's National Air and Space Intelligence Center concluded that if the Burevestnik became operational, it would provide Moscow with a unique weapon with intercontinental range capability. Information on the per-unit cost of Russia's Burevestnik missile is very limited, but sources suggest an estimated unit cost of approximately $5.2 million. So what prompted the development to begin with? The development of the Burevestnik is rooted in Moscow's long-standing opposition to the United States missile defense initiatives. When Washington withdrew from the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missiles Treaty in 2001 and expanded NATO's reach in Eastern Europe, Russia viewed these moves as a direct threat to its nuclear deterrence posture. Putin has consistently framed the Burevestnik as a response to these developments. According to Russian military expert Alexei Leonkov, the missile's intended role would be to target and eliminate enemy command centers, energy facilities, and industrial infrastructure that survive an initial nuclear exchange. However, the successful test belies a previous incident in 2019 when a catastrophic accident occurred during a weapons test near the White Sea, claiming the lives of at least 5 Russian nuclear specialists. The explosion released radiation into surrounding areas, prompting temporary evacuations. Although the Kremlin did not initially confirm the claims, Putin later presented state awards to the widows of the scientists who had died. Putin later announced a successful test of the missile in October 2023, suggesting that technical problems had been resolved and that Russia was close to operational deployment. Well, the Western observers are now paying close attention to a recent statement by President Vladimir Putin. Listen in.
Of the Burevestnik missile with a nuclear propulsion engine that has an unlimited range. I know that I have a report from the industrial side. I know what the ministry thinks about this unique weapon that has nothing like that, no counterparts around.
President Putin has emphasized that the Burevestnik missile is unparalleled globally, boasting unmatched dynamics and capabilities. The timing of this successful test is significant, coinciding with the U.S. lifting restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range Western-supplied missiles and imposing new sanctions on major Russian oil companies, which Moscow views as a direct provocation. This test follows a strategic nuclear forces drill overseen by Putin, underscoring its symbolic importance. U.S. President Donald Trump has swiftly criticized Putin's announcement, deeming the missile test inappropriate. Listen in.
A nuclear submarine, the greatest in the world, right off their shores. So, I mean, it doesn't have to go 8,000 miles. And they're not playing games with us. We're not playing games with them either. We test missiles all the time, but you know, we do have a submarine, a nuclear submarine. We don't need to go 8,000 miles. And I don't think it's an appropriate thing for Putin to be saying either, by the way. He ought to get the war ended. A war that should have taken 1 week is now in its soon 4th year. That's what he ought to do instead of testing missiles.
And that brings us to the big question. Has the successful test of Russia's Burevestnik missile sent shockwaves in the West? What are the implications of this development, particularly in light of the US's decision to allow Ukraine to utilize certain long-range Western-supplied missiles? We take this conversation forward. I have with me Alison Mutler, former AP Bureau Chief in Romania, joining me currently from Scotland. Alison, welcome to NewsX. I have to begin by understanding your first thoughts on this successful test by Russia.
A successful test by Russia, it's a message to the West that Russia is getting prepared or is prepared for military action. Russia is prepared to escalate the conflict. Russia does not want negotiations, although on the other side we're told they do want negotiations. But it's to show the aim of this test, which Donald Trump called inappropriate, is to a show of strength, a show of force for Vladimir Putin to show to the world that Russia has this weapon that nobody else has, and they are militarily very strong. And it's a warning to the West and to NATO that should the conflict escalate further, Russia has at its disposal the best weapons in the world.
At the same time, Alison Mutler, does this now create a new headache for Donald Trump, who is somewhere still perhaps hoping to resolve the war between Russia and Ukraine? There was a meeting that took place between Trump and Putin, and Trump was, of course, very positive after the meeting, but clearly the conflict remains, the war goes on. And now we continuously learn that Russia's tested a missile, that the war that both Russia and Ukraine continue to attack one another, and the West is hoping that more and more sanctions will deter Russia. But look at what Russia is up to on a daily basis. Clearly, this is a message to the West. But how do you think the West now needs to really navigate this entire situation? It doesn't seem as though imposing more sanctions on Russia is really the message that Putin was hoping for.
I think Putin is actually personally disappointed that Trump called off talks in Budapest, Hungary, because for Vladimir Putin, whenever he sits down for talks with Donald Trump, it makes him look good and Trump look bad, and that is a missed opportunity for Putin. So I think he's saying, okay, you're not going to talk to me, then I'll show you what we have in our military depots. So he's showing, okay, you won't talk to me, but we have a lot of military weapons. And it is a sign of escalation in the conflict. And the West will have to be, and they are at the moment, analysing very carefully what this means and how they should respond, because I don't think the West wants to escalate the conflict. They want it to end. Donald Trump certainly does. But when Vladimir Putin does test these weapons of strength, then there's a lot of analysis which is going on behind the scenes. I think we'll see in the coming days, perhaps there'll be a statement from NATO, there'll be a statement from other leaders responding to this, or there won't be. The idea that the threat will just sit there in the air and there'll be no response, which I think perhaps Putin wants. He would like a response, and if there's no response, then he would not be happy with that.
All right, Ms. Matla, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX with that perspective. We leave it there and step into a very quick break.